Cool. Thanks, everyone. And sorry again for this misunderstanding. How do I find an invite? Oh, there it is. Wow, they switched it around. Yeah, I cannot update the invite because I am not allowed to update the invite of the meeting. So something for future to update. I added it to the meeting to the agenda, at least. Cool. Henry, are you leading the meeting, or shall I drive that and you can participate? What do you prefer?
I think I can drive it, and maybe someone can help to make notes.
Yeah.
Is everybody here already? Check.
Well, there's 3 minutes afterwards, so.
Yeah, okay, let's start. Yeah, so welcome to the second meeting for the disaster working group. Disaster recovery working group, sorry.
Well, we'll see about that one.
Yeah, it wasn't meant like that. Yeah, I think it doesn't make sense to read through all of the things, what's been done and what's happening next from this meeting. Maybe if you go through these different links that have been provided and what's been done, already you can see that a lot of questions have been raised and also answered already in different issues. Thanks for Fabian for answering a lot of questions. And what we all did this week, I think, was learning a lot and learning about Geo, and the other way around, learning about how our infrastructure is looking like in staging, right? And what I tried to do is to compile a list of findings that I got so far. There's this link here that you maybe can look into. And I would like to go through the list of questions, gaps, and things today, just to clarify on them maybe first. And later, I have some points written down for making decisions on what to do next, because there are several options on what we can do, and we should make decisions so we really can start working on that. So maybe let's go on the questions that I mentioned. I see Fabian already answered a few minutes ago. First of all, the goal of this working group was to see how we can use Geo for disaster recovery. And so we also wanted to find possible gaps by doing a failover of staging. And I already found some gaps during my research, which I listed here. There's some missing support for some things that we would like to have. One thing would be, for instance, support for Patroni cluster on secondary. This is worked on, it seems, and we could work around this probably manually. This is my understanding so far. If you want to do the failover and staging, then one issue, if you want to go to production later, is there's no support for repo rebalancing currently, which we can often do in production, like moving repos to different GitLab shards. This would need to be implemented. In staging, I think we don't do this, so we still can work on staging with Geo for that. And then there are certain data types which are not supported right now in Geo, which I listed here, where we need to see what we can do about that to either implement this in Geo or find other ways to sync those data if you really want to have a disaster recovery solution. So that's things I found so far. One other interesting feature that I would like to see in Geo in the future would be that we can spin up infrastructure automatically on demand, because right now, in every solution that we know, we would need to do this manually in case of a failover if we want to have a warm standby site, which isn't fully populated with servers out of cost reasons. Looking at mainly how staging is set up right now and how Geo is set up in staging, I also found some to-dos or even maybe blockers that we need to work around. And I want to mention them because they're important to also understand the effort that we need to take to make this work. One important thing is in staging and production, we use Postgres and Patroni not from Omnibus, but we deploy our own versions via Chef. So this is a difference to the setup of Geo and staging right now, where we take this from Omnibus and don't have Patroni at all. So we need to see how we can get support either in staging production to install from Omnibus and Postgres, but that's not a short-term thing, I think. Or if how we can work around this manually for this first iteration of testing. I think this can be done manually. We don't need Geo to fully support automatically, manage the Patroni cluster right now. Second thing is in Geo, we have a single node, in staging, we have a single node Geo installation. That means failing over to it could be problematic because I'm not sure if that would be good enough to serve all of staging traffic. I mean, for doing it once, test a little bit, switching back, that could work. But if you really want to run it for a longer time, then probably we should have a multi-node setup. And also that would be more realistic for what we are aiming for. Just switching over to a single instance wouldn't be that realistic to test for.
Can I just stop here for a sec,
Yep.
Henry? So I'm raising again a question of what is our goal? If our goal is just to prove that Geo can fail over, then single node will be fine. I think we agreed last time that that is not what we specifically want to find out. So I would consider this probably to be the biggest blocker right now. So the database stuff, as far as I know, Geo supports external databases, if nothing else, right? Like, so there are things around the current setup, but actually being able to take all the traffic after the failover that we have, even in staging, I would consider to be the biggest blocker right now that we would probably want to do before we do a failover.
Yes, I agree. Adding to this, the next blocker would be that currently we only sync selectively. We, I think, would want to sync all of staging. That means right now we just sync for certain repositories or groups, right, Fabian?
Correct.
And I think we want to switch on to fully sync staging if you want to test this. So that would need to be done, but that shouldn't be hard. But it also needs a bigger cluster, probably. And then also big blocker, I think, is that if you want to do the full cycle, like failing over and failing back, we would need to set up staging as a Geo primary. That would mean that we need to set it up to run the tracking DB and the log cursor on staging. And we need to figure out how we can set this up and test this, of course, properly. And that would also mean that we deviate from how we set up production, and we need to, no, it's some work to be done to really do the full cycle. So I think that's, from my point of view, at least the biggest things to work on. But I can come back to this maybe later in the document, because I have some options for how we can maybe iteratively get this on. And some things on open questions, just for my understanding of how Geo is working, I listed here, for instance, how we would sync Redis, but it seems that we don't need to do anything about this because Redis would just work, right? Fabian is always shaking his head, so I see the answer.
Yes, so essentially every Geo secondary gets its own Redis database. There is no syncing. So I can answer these if you would like. So Redis is not synced, but I think that's fine. Prefect or Gitly cluster. Essentially, Geo secondaries get their own Gitly instance, whatever that looks like, but it could be a Gitly cluster setup. So Geo will replicate data and talk to Gitly. So that is not handled by Prefect. Can we use Prefect for Gitly syncing and disaster recovery? There is some further discussion on that. In the future, that may be actually a very desirable thing to do. currently, as far as I understand it, Gitly cluster assumes co-location of all of its nodes in one data center, and the latency across data centers would be prohibitive. So I think for now, the answer is no. Right, so what would actually happen is you have, let's say, Gitly cluster on your primary or Gitly, right? You have Gitly cluster or a single Gitly node on your secondary, and Geo actually replicates the data asynchronously from A to B.
It's interesting because I think in the issue that I linked, the initiative for co-selfing of Gitly and implementing Prefect from Andrew Thomas, I think they proposed that we could have one Gitly node being in a different region and having it synced by Prefect, right? And I think we should circle back to the Gitly team to ask them if this is possible or not, and if this is a good idea.
Yes, I did that today, and the answer is, I think currently this is not something that they recommend, as far as I understand it. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I linked to the Slack thread internally as well, because I was surprised to see this, and it would be cool if it worked, but I don't think it does at the moment. That's my understanding right now. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, I think we should later have some discussion around if you want to make Prefect work for disaster recovery, or if you want over geolocation, and or if you want to have Geo doing this. I don't know what would be better in the long term. But yeah, okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in the short term, if the one thing works and the other doesn't, then we should probably prefer that one. But
sure. Yeah.
I can also, if you scroll up, if you like, can give like a little bit of color on the like the gaps that you identified, so that everybody's.
Did you already talk about this one?
Okay. Well, the answer is, I think, in my view, that's maybe also something up to the team. Anything that is in GCS buckets should use cross-region replication for that. We do that only at the beta level. I think that's fine. And so Geo is essentially responsible for, at that point, for the Git data, building on what I just said earlier. Okay. And obviously, you have the sort of the warm standby capacity where you actually have a working GitLab instance at that point.
Okay. For the gaps you wanted to answer.
Yes. So Marin is right. We support external databases. I don't even know if the Patroni version that you use on staging is the same as is in Omnibus, and if they are compatible, right? So
no.
I think in the long term, right, I think using Omnibus is maybe preferred in general, but I think for now, you can probably use an external Patroni cluster, and Patroni has standby cluster functionalities. Repo balancing is correct. I don't think we do that. Then missing support for syncing data. Group wikis is likely going to be a concern of the group that actually implemented that feature, with the plan of shipping that in the next 2 to 3 releases, but who knows? I think that's a little bit up for grabs. Version snippets is going to happen in 13.7. We have no plans right now for Elasticsearch integration. We've talked a little bit about it. So there's no distinct timeline on it. As far as I know, for DR purposes, you can re-index your Elasticsearch if you really want it. So there is no real, so let's say, data loss, right? It's just time that you lose, which is important. GitLab Pages is blocked on a large re-architecture of GitLab Pages, which is also likely going to mean that GitLab Pages supports object storage. You can regenerate GitLab Pages by rerunning CI pipelines. So there is no, so as in it doesn't support Geo, but there won't be any data loss as far as I'm aware, right? So there are some definite gaps here, but at the moment, for at least the last 2 items, I don't actually know what the timeline is. And then the last comment is no support for spinning up infrastructure on demand. That's absolutely correct. I think Geo has not really, as a team, sort of contributed very much to automation efforts in spinning up or down infrastructure. We are working on some automation capabilities to make it easier, for example, to promote or demote, right? But this is more something that there were like 5 different initiatives, right, to handle this.
I think that's also
toolkit.
A very big scope. I mean, there are so many ways, and maybe it's unfair to say it's a gap. I mean, it's a wish list from my side. So sorry for saying gap. It's not a gap.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have
I
a
think everything you said.
recommendation?
Yes.
Like for your customers, do you recommend a certain route here, like going with Terraform or like CloudFormation, or do you guys have reference architectures?
We have, I mean, Geo is essentially a configuration of GitLab. So whatever works for reference architectures, let's say in general, with some additional bits works for Geo as well. Right? So if you choose to provision your stuff with Terraform, that's fine. I think we want to have more of a unified front, what we recommend to customers, and say like use the GitLab environment toolkit for this, which is Terraform Ansible based. I've seen anything from customers, right? From no automation at all to, you know, Chef, Ansible, Puppet, I don't know, right? So it really depends. Gotcha. And for staging and production, my understanding is that you choose to use Chef, right? So that would be something that would need to happen. And that is probably a large amount of work.
The problem right now is that we are in a hybrid setup. So we have part of the fleet running in Kubernetes and parts on VMs, which makes this not as clear cut as like let's just use Chef to push this forward. So yeah. Not to mention that we are actually deploying with Terraform Ansible combo. That's the deployer project. So not as clear cut.
Yes. I think from the Geo perspective, and I mean, that was, I think, controversial for various customers. We do have Helm charts for Geo as well. So I don't think there's anything particular that would make it not feasible to run Geo on Kubernetes if that is desired, right? That's maybe in the longer term important. But this spinning up infrastructure or in general configuring it, right? And then let's say in another iteration also saying this is the minimal set of Geo nodes that we actually need, right? And then when we fail over, we want to maybe spin things up on demand to save on cost earlier, right? That functionality does not exist within Geo at all.
I think that's
right?
also, I wouldn't couple these concerns together because it's such a big effort to get it right for everybody in every kind of infrastructure, but having maybe a hook, like a callback for spinning up infrastructure at a certain stage of failover, that would be maybe a good thing. So that customers could plug in their own stuff there to happen, and then something like that.
For the sake of time, that's not something we do.
Okay, thanks for this great summary. I think at least my what I see here is that for doing a failover test and staging, I don't see a blocker which makes it impossible, as in we have gaps that we can't overcome in the next time. Like even if you don't sync all of the data, we can maybe find ways how to do the failover test without, you know, losing data on the staging side if you do it right. If you leave some things out maybe. And I wanted to come to the proposals of how we iteratively can go on with these approaches maybe in the document, if there are no other questions or comments on these things we discussed right now. Okay, then as we now understand, there are several things that need to be done to do a failover in staging. And of course, the biggest goal would be to do the full circle, like a full failover, testing, running it for a while with everything synced, and then fail back, right? But this is a lot of effort and a lot of testing needed to do this. And so there are options how we can test parts of it, maybe iteratively going closer to this goal, which I would suggest that we consider to do, maybe all of them or a part of them, and see how far we can get within a certain point of time. And the very first simple thing that we could do right now is to just promote Geo right now at this time, because that would just stop the replication, bring it up, the database up, and we could just test on this one node how it works, right? That is simple. It wouldn't destroy staging anyway because we don't reroute traffic. And we have a runbook for how to recreate the Geo node that takes around half an hour, I think, or an hour to sync the database back. So we can do this several times for testing. That's very easy. It could be done right now. The next thing that we could do, of course, is setting up a multi-node Geo-Instance cluster for realistic testing, and that we can maybe sync everything from staging. that would be more realistic and would bring us to a state where we really can run better tests, like with all the traffic maybe, and would also help us to do things without breaking staging, because if we don't, fail back, then staging still can stay fine. We just will not see the data that we change while testing back in staging. But I mean, that's fine for testing. And we would see how failover is working. Another option would be to have two new clusters, like a primary and a secondary cluster for testing failover and failback. That also would help testing without destroying staging first, if you do something wrong. And then, of course, the last step would be that we really do the full thing, the full circle of failing over to a geo cluster and then failing back to staging and hoping that we really get all the data synced back in between and everything is working out, right? And that would be the end goal, I guess. It's just a question how many gaps we in between find to accomplish this. But I think if we go on iteratively, there are higher chances to get things going instead of aiming at the last step here in one go, right? Because I think we need to learn some things first. That would be the thing that I propose right now. But I'm open for opinions on that.
Sorry, I don't think I followed. What would be the thing that you proposed? That we do preparation and get the number 2A4 as the goal for us to strive for?
I think the critical thing is if we fail over and want to fail back is to see that we are sure that this is fully working, right? And if we do this at the first time in staging, we want staging to work after that, right? We don't want to have inconsistencies. And that's why I think maybe we should have maybe first two test clusters where we test the fail over and fail back cycle and be sure how it works and how we set up primary and secondary clusters for failing over. And then
what would we gain by doing that? Because if I understand that option correctly, that would mean we would be doing basically what our customers are doing right now, have two clusters that they are failing over in between, and we kind of know the answer to that. Correct me if I'm misunderstanding that.
Yeah, probably that's then a learning step for me at least, for how all these things has to be set up to be working. Yeah. But yeah, maybe we can skip this also.
No, I'm just asking. I'm not saying that we should do this or that. Yeah. I'm asking what is the difference, right? Like if we say we want to do that 0.3, that would mean we would probably use our reference architectures to set everything up, do some syncing, and then do a failover. But that we already know it's working, right? Like we have customers, we have.
But okay, our customers are doing this. How often are we doing this? Like the people involved in this work group here. How often do we the full cycle of failover and failback?
I think the answer is not often enough because it is highly manual, right? Which is another thing to actually automate this, right? And have it in CI, for example, as part of quality for a 3K reference cluster. That's also an ongoing thing. But I think this here is really saying, before we roll out changes in staging, you need to understand how do these things actually work together, and you can do that and throw it away if things blow up, right? If you
I get that, but then my question, I guess, should be, when you say set up multi-node primary and secondary test clusters to do this test, what kind of setup are you having in mind? Like, are we talking about classic reference architectures that we have with VMs, Omnibus? Or are you talking about, I don't know, Helm charts? Or are you talking about a copy of what we have right now in staging? Because all of those have their own advantages and disadvantages.
That's a good question, because we need to spin up a bigger geo cluster anyway in staging, to which we want to fail over. And so I thought we need to dimension this one, so to know how many nodes do we need, how big does it need to be. And if you know that, we could maybe, it's not harder to have two of them if we anyway know how to configure them and set them up, right, as a first step. So bringing up one new geo cluster isn't much more work than bringing up two of them, just for testing, and then testing the full cycle of failing over and failing back, and then prepare for doing this for staging itself.
I feel like I get two paths forward here. One is we could go down your first option of just testing staging as it is and as it stands today, just to learn the process of how that impacts our current architecture of how we have everything set up inside of our infrastructure. And for point 3 here, maybe we use our reference architecture and spin something up in an automated fashion, and we do those failovers on a regular cadence. You know, we could automate that as much as we can, because we could use learnings from that and feed that back into the work that we are ongoing with our current method of trying to do this work for staging as is.
But that can be a parallel effort, right? I think that is something that I think quality, for example, is actually aiming to do, because that is in general a good idea.
That gets us over the hump that you mentioned that we don't do it often enough. And if we do it often enough, we'll slowly learn what we need to automate and what we need to make easier for ourselves in general.
Right, but that is a long path. It is a very, very long path. And this working group can exist to do that, sure. But I wonder whether it's better, like we are better off using our time to do something different there. Not different, but something that is more resembling more of our infrastructure rather than practicing there. Like that's like, I would even say like Geo team, if you want to decide that, you can do that on your own right now.
Yeah, well, we kind of have decided to pursue that anyways, right?
Okay.
Independent of the staging. Even though I'm hooking up people here for work that are technically not in my team, but no, but I think there are two parallel things that are valuable independently from each other and can help inform each other. But I do think that just my 2 cents from the proposal that I see from Henry here, to me, is essentially you start small, you try to understand how the smallest thing works, then you increment the complexity to a multi-node, right? You again try to configure this and understand how it behaves, you know, trying to eliminate as much risk as possible of impacting staging, because that's critical, right? You know, you kind of do that, you proceed to a bubble test, and then when you are most confident that you actually understand how the fail back and forth process actually work, then you do it, right? Because I think what we want to avoid is a situation where we spin up something, you know, and we forgot stuff, and all of a sudden staging is broken. I'm pretty sure that would not go down well on the Thanksgiving weekend, right? So we should avoid that. And I think this is, to me, sounds like you know, we have actually checkpoints of what we can accomplish, right? And say like, yes, this worked and this works and this works. These are the issues we already uncovered, until we arrive at this full loop, which I do believe should be the end state that is desirable, right? So that is to work towards, but I wouldn't want a situation personally where, you know, that value will be realized in 3 months or 2 months, you know, and until then we have nothing else to kind of say we've reached that goal that is actually working, right? I think that that's always hard.
And I know we are at time, but Henry, a question for you. So if you want to approach it that way, would you set up just yet another cluster on the side? Like, would that be an option to set up a cluster on the side and connect the current secondary, geo-secondary or geo-instance to this, and then have them sync between one another? Do all the failovers, and then maybe at some point add staging as another setup in that cluster, and then you kind of introduce staging into that cluster and then see magic happen.
That would be the best idea, actually, yeah. Because if we promote the new geo cluster and then sync it with a second geo cluster, we can have a data set of staging inside of it. We can test forth and back.
Yeah.
And we don't need to shut down staging or route traffic away from it or something like that. And yeah, that would be a very good testing opportunity, because we would need to change staging anyway later to work with Geo. And I think we first should come up with a very good setting for Geo that's automatable, and then go on changing the architecture of staging and how it's set up with Postgres, Patroni, and Geo. Yeah. I think if we can agree on that we try to accomplish until Thanksgiving that we sync between those two clusters with a staging data set, but not with actual staging. That would be, I think, a very good solution because takes out a lot of pressure of criticality, but gives us all the results that we want to have. Yeah.
I mean,
sorry,
I don't want. Sorry, go ahead.
Can you so you have staging your current, let's say your current active primary. We have a tiny geosecondary single node. So you're proposing adding another geosecondary in a scaled fashion that will connect to what?
So what does current geosecondary have? Like, does it replicate any data?
Yeah, it replicates a couple of groups, GitLab org.
So how about for testing purposes, how about we connect the third cluster, the new one that we create, connect it to the secondary that is currently there, that has current data, sync those two between each other, do all the failovers we need, and only then introduce staging as it is right now into that party and do the failovers in between. I don't know.
Essentially you sever the connection between our small secondary and the main primary right now because it has a copy of the data, at this moment. And then you link up these things and you have no connection to the original anymore, but we have a copy of staging. Yeah, I sounds good to me, but I'm the product manager. So if I think maybe Douglas and Akriti and Nick should think about that, and if there are any concerns with that approach.
Yeah, I think we should continue that discussion because it seems like there's some implications of I'm not sure exactly if you can just say like sync a secondary from another secondary without having promoted first and what those implications are.
We can promote it first and then sync it, right?
Yeah. Daisy chaining. Thunderbolt promises.
I mean,
right? It's not
if I'm understanding correctly, staging is currently not the primary, right? Like that was the thing that we were saying. So, right, like you can easily say that the geosecondary is the primary already.
No, that's not quite correct. I think the staging environment at the moment is already configured to some extent to serve the secondary, right? I'm just assuming there must be some configuration so that actually works, right? So in essence, the staging currently is already acting as a primary, but I don't know the details of that, right? But it must be the case because otherwise these two instances couldn't talk to each other.
Okay, we are over time, so I just want to suggest this course of action.
I mean, I think we can gather this in an issue, make a mermaid diagram, right? And say, this is the proposal. Technical people, please pitch in. What are the implications? And then we can continue actually doing this, right? Because I think that's the next step.
And let's put some timelines on that and say maybe we take tomorrow to actually do all of that, sync up on all of that, and say coming Friday, we make a decision. We can do it in the channel, in the Slack channel, or if necessary, jump on a quick call to make a decision where to go next. So basically, 1 day investigation between everyone. So Geo plus Henry Skarbek also can help out here, and Friday we'll have a decision on whether that's possible or not, or whether we need to create completely new clusters then.
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. All right. Given that we are over time, I will upload this call after I finish my next call that I'm already late to. And share it in Slack in here. We didn't take too many notes, but hopefully recording will be sufficient. And let's keep in touch through Slack.
Cool. I will put in
Thanks
some
everyone
notes
for your work. Bye.
Bye-bye.